Okay, so where we are will be section C, topic 1 on the Wanderer nodes, which is Wanderers and ET Confederation or Orion. Basically, Wanderers contact with higher dimensional beings, and we'll go through all of the sections, first being Wanderers and Confederation contact, examples of awakening, Wanderers and Orion contact, Orion abduction and contacts, negative Wanderers, and assessing ET contact. And then we'll get into higher density evolution in terms of work in consciousness in 4th and 5th density, which is really interesting. And as far as we can get through the PDF. The PDF goes to page 12, and we're right in the beginning of page 8. So we'll go as far as we can, and first we'll deal with contact experiences for Wanderers, which, is different than public or general person contact experiences. So let's go into the PDF. We're on page 8. Section is Wanderers and ET Confederation Orion. Section 1 is Wanderers and Confederation contact, page 8. Ross says, the methods used to awaken Wanderers are varied. The center of each approach is an entrance into the conscious and subconscious in such a way as to avoid causing fear and to maximize the potential for an understandable subjective experience which has meaning for the entity. Many such occur in sleep, others in the midst of many activities during waking hours. The approach is flexible. It does not necessarily include close encounters. The subjective expectations of entities cause the nature and the detail of the thought form experience offered by Confederation thought form entities. If the Wanderer expects a physical examination, it will be experienced with as little distortion towards alarm or discomfort as allowable by the nature of the expectations of the subconscious, meaning the Wanderer's subconscious. Confederation craft contact is generally thought form. Wanderer Confederation landed craft contact is rare. I'll explain all this. Confederation thought form experiences are subjective and for the most part do not occur in this density. So this is very interesting material and very useful as a standard by which to compare a lot of the UFO research community material on contact. So, go to a UFO conference or go to a UFO site and you'll see many, many experiences of contact. Is it positive contact? Is it negative contact? Usually people are not so clear. Abduction is one type. Landed craft is a type. Visions is a type. Dream experience is a type. But there's a clear distinction between positive and negative. And that's one of the themes we're going to explore here. So Ra's perspective is that although there are many different methods used to awaken Wanderers, the center, meaning the prime requirement for the Confederation, is to A, avoid causing fear, and B, to maximize the potential for an understandable experience, meaning an understandable personal experience, subjective, meaning that the contactee knows what it means. The method of contact, the symbolism, the experience of contact itself, and the narrative would have meaning for the person who has it, although its meaning may be different for somebody else with a similar set of experiences. This is very, very important to know because, first of all, it's like dream interpretation. When I dream of an ocean, it may not have the same meaning as it does to you, and in the book of dream symbols, it may not fit the standard definition. Likewise, a direct Confederation wanderer contact is very personal experience, and therefore the method used to determine the meaning is best for that person to do by inner work, meditation, self-reflection, some kind of inner contemplation. What did this mean to me? And going to an expert may not necessarily give an answer. But clearly what we see is that the Confederation intends to not cause fear. Now, there are channels who say, in fact, I think Bashar or Lisa Royals, Germain, or the Zetas through Nancy Leader, things like, well, if you have fear, it's your problem. They don't understand human emotions, and they're just trying to wake you up. Well, I don't believe that. And my own positive contacts were without fear and were quite clearly understandable. And I've had some negative contacts, and they very much involved fear or involved desire to cause fear or terror or trauma, violation, infringement, ... And it's very important to know that if the experience had fear and a sense of infringement, then it pretty clearly was negative. And later on in this PDF, we'll go on, it's actually section 6. Ra says, if there's fear and doom, this is on page 10, if there's fear and doom, the contact was quite likely negative. If the result is hope, friendly feelings, and an awakening of positive feeling of purposeful service to others, the marks of Confederation contact are evident. Ra said that the Confederation will only contact wanderers, not 3D natives. 3D natives, or people who are not wanderers, have other guides and helpers. Of course, a higher self, angels, other beings who could certainly help them through direct contact in sleep or daytime for spiritual assistance. But for the Confederation, their only points of contact directly are wanderers. And a Confederation contact is quite clearly positive and beneficial and uplifting. It's interesting that some occur during waking hours. Now, that may be a sighting, that may be a vision, that may be a synchronicity. It's hard to say. But wanderers do get very unusual contact from the Confederation in waking times. Like you look across the street and you see somebody and you have this sort of joyous feeling, and somehow you come back to yourself. That's part of what Confederation contact is about, is coming back home. It's a greeting from home. Later in the raw material, Don asked Ra about, I think, his and Carla's experiences as a child seeing a colored ball of light, a colored sphere in their room. And I've heard from other people who said they saw balls of light in their room. And I said to the people who asked what Ra said, which is, these are greetings from home. They're basically wishing you goodwill, wishing you well from home. And your homies look like colored spheres of light, or white sphere of light. That's what a higher dimensional body may manifest as in a Confederation vision contact. So that's very interesting. And the purpose of that is basically to help us remember who we are and make peace with being here and continue on with our mission, our work, which is service to other. So that's very interesting. They also say that, the subconscious expectations of the wanderers do shape the nature of the Confederation contact. This is all in thought form. So Ross says they are not occurring in this density. Now, does that mean they're occurring in third density time-space, meaning the inner planes, astral plane, or they are occurring in fourth or fifth density, or sixth? I'm not sure. But they're certainly not physical, generally, these Confederation contacts. So you may see something physically, but it may not actually be occurring in the physical, meaning others couldn't see it. That's also unusual. So if the wanderer expects a physical exam, right, typical negative contact scenario, then it will be experienced. but the purpose, the great desire of the Confederation is to make sure there's no fear or alarm or discomfort. And so if a wanderer expects rough treatment, in respecting their free will, the Confederation, that for another reason or for some aspect of that higher self agreement, right? The agreement between the wanderer and the Confederation to have the contact, the nature of the contact has to respect the free will of the wanderer, which is the way of positive contact, respecting free will. And they would then have to do some kind of physical exam or make it look like what the wanderer expected, which is kind of funny, which is like if you expect to be poorly treated, your angels and guides may have to give you some of that experience without causing fear or discomfort. It's a little bit ironic, actually. So they also say that Confederation craft, meaning ships coming on down, like Ra in Egypt in previous times or in Central America, and also in many other places with indigenous groups, that kind of contact is rare. Generally, it's a thought form contact, and these are again subjective and are really only they're for your eyes only, meaning for the wanderer, him or herself, which also gives you a sense of comparing to Stephen Greer, Operation SETI, where they vector in the craft with lights and protocol. Would positive ships, would Confederation ships even do that? Their prime directive is, non-infringement on free will. If that group includes somebody who's not a wanderer, would the Confederation make appearance? I don't think so. Would the Confederation make appearance to a group where everybody's a wanderer, but they're using basically some kind of mechanical and psychic means to cause a contact? Personally, I don't think so either. So then, who's being vectored in? It's up to you to figure that out. But I wouldn't trust such a methodology. In general, the Confederation contacts, I would think that it's not really in general, but absolutely, they contact wanderers only according to a requirement at the higher self level of that wanderer. So anyway, let's open this up for questions. We're going to go even further with this in this discussion. But any questions at this point? This intro to Wanderer Confederation contact. Can one ask to be contacted? Yes, Karen asks. Yes, you can ask to be contacted. In general, it's the strength of the need for contact, the sincerity of the call, that determines what will happen. If your calling is sincere and the force of will is strong and it's a genuine need, not for entertainment, then it's possible. If, however, it's to get some information that you would be better to determine or discover by yourself, by intuition or inner work, then it won't happen. So, I hope that answers the question. I mean, I think that, it's a good question. What would be a need? You see, Ra said that they were in contact with several 100,000 people, actually. But that doesn't mean those people are getting any kind of thought form, Confederation, craft, or nightly contact experience. It just means that there's a telepathic link. So there is contact happening that's subjective in the sense of thought transmission, thought, hope, inspiration. And that fills the need for spiritual solace, spiritual guidance. If the person wants a craft contact or come down and appear in front of me, that's not a sincere need, actually. See, anything that you can do for yourself, the higher self and Confederation would tend towards letting you do for yourself. So, they're not going to take the steps or come to you when there's further ground you could cover to come to them. Yes, pure, not ego-driven. Not driven, basically coming from a truly heart-based longing that takes that takes into account your own responsibility for the feelings you have, and is a sincere strength of calling. So there's the degree of will and the intensity and focus of the will in the calling, and it's really a need according to the need for healing, for self-remembrance, for self-return, self-embrace. And it fills a genuine need that you can't fully do for yourself, but you've done as much as possible. If God helps those who help themselves, right? So higher self and Confederation help those who sincerely and significantly help themselves. And so, like Jesus said, to one who has much, much shall be given. To one who has little, even that little shall be taken away. This is a very, very important quote. And it has direct bearing on this issue of wanderers seeking and getting contact with the Confederation. Anybody else ask a question? Anybody else? Joel? Joel said, yes, I think, Joel, that indeed dream contact is quite common. In the first book from Elsewhere, right? There were a number of stories of people who, as children, had flying dreams with their companions, or went to other planets, or saw crystal cities, and were with family, with their happy friends, and that was a form of Confederation contact. Confederation contact includes contact with your home group. It's not just somebody else or some other group. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Karen asks, can you figure out where home is through contact? Yes, you can, but you can figure out where home is by meditation. And I don't think the Confederation or higher self is going to just give you that information by a simple demand for it. You see, you have to, he or she who has much, to whom, to one who has much, much shall be given. That's the key. Okay? So, do much for yourself, and much will be done for you. Do little for yourself, and little will be given to you. That is a serious principle here. And, it's the law of attraction, right? So I think that you can take that to the bank. If you want somebody to do something for you, higher self or Confederation or your guides or your angels, do much for yourself. Okay. That's a good question, Billy asks. Regarding thought communication, how do you know it's the Confederation and not your guides? Well, for many wanderers, I would assume that our home density, home group family acts as guides for us. And, information is information. The source is less important, perhaps, meaning identifying it. Again, you would have to, the answer to all these questions about how do I know, is meditate, reflect, contemplate, spend time alone, focus your mind light on the question, move the mind towards silence, let go of distraction and attachment to what's in front of you, and focus the mind's power on the question. So the answer to all these how do I know is seek within. Lots of people ask me, how do I know this, how do I know that? Well, look inside. That's how I know anything. How do I know, if you think I know, that the raw material is really 6 density and without distortion, without significant distortion? I mean, you may think it is, you may think it isn't. Regardless, it is or isn't. And I believe I know it is. Maybe I'm wrong. But how do you know anything subjectively? There's some kind of resonance between the conscious mind and a deep inner anchor, an anchor of true sensing, the feeling of truth, a sense of truth. It's a good question, how do you know anything? But there is a feeling of truth, and there's a feeling that comes that you can sense in your heart, mind, gut, in your gut, your heart, your mind, unified, that comes from recognition of different levels of truth, and the difference between truth and lie, and shallow truth, like coffee is black, and I have 5 fingers. Well, that's true, but it's not particularly profound or of another density or of high density understanding. So you'd have to attune the mind to the ability to sense higher truth and genuine reality. Anyway, let's go further here. Time is running. We're moving towards the end of the first hour. Examples of awakening contact. The most efficient mode of contact is that which you experience at present, meaning the channeling, actually. Infringement upon free will is greatly undesired. This is the sine qua non, without which nothing makes sense regarding Confederation positive contact. Infringement upon free will is greatly undesired. Wanderers are the only subjects for thought projections, which make up so-called close encounters and the meetings between positively oriented social memory complexes and wanderers. Meaning, wanderers are the only ones getting close encounters or any type of meeting with positively oriented social memory complexes, meaning 4th, 5th, 6th density, positive Confederation groups. In general, a home group. You could meet your home group. It's more likely you would meet your home group if you've had association in your human series of incarnations with other Confederation groups. Then it's possible to meet other Confederation groups because they've had a working relationship with you in past lives or currently. in other planes. But in general, the prime contact would be with your home world soul family. One such example of that, of which you are familiar, is that of the one known as Morris. This was case number 1 in the book called Secrets of the UFO, which is a very interesting book. Came out before The Raw Contact, written by Don Elkins and Carla. I recommend it strongly. Very, very nice. And also very important channeling from the 50s and 60s between, genuine positive Confederation sources and other contactees. The best of the Space Brother type 50s and 60s positive contacts and channel information. Really good stuff in the book Secrets of the UFO. You could probably find, you could certainly buy it online. You probably could find passages from it online also. So one such example of this kind of contact is the case of Morris, whoever that was. In this case, previous contact with other entities in the entity circle of friends experienced was negatively oriented. However, Morris was impervious to this contact and could not see it. So the idea is that this person named Morris, in his group, the other people of the group experienced a negative contact. However, Morris was impervious and didn't see it. However, this must have been the same case. At that time, its inner voice alerted Morris to go by himself, to another place, and there an entity with the thought form, shape, and appearance of the other contact appeared and gazed at him, thus awakening in him the desire to seek truth of this occurrence and of the experiences of its incarnation in general. The feeling of being awakened or activated is the goal of this type of contact. The duration and the imagery used varies depending on the subconscious expectations of the wanderer experiencing the opportunity for activation. Very, very interesting. Thank you, Earhart, for that. Secrets of the UFO. That's wonderful, actually. I'm going to get that link later, too. So this is also very, very revealing passage here. So first of all, Ross says it, wanderers are the only subjects for these thought projections. This is not a physical contact, even if you see him or you touch him, meaning the being of the Confederation. Wanderers are the only ones getting these contacts. Basically, to protect the free will of 3D natives that would do better with other positive, higher dimensional contacts, like guides or angels, actually. So, in this case of Morris, because of his consciousness, he was protected against a genuine negative contact, but the others in his group were not. And so they had some negative contact. He then gets an intuition alerting him to go to another place, and there he sees a thought form entity, which he probably thought was a solid entity, and that being looks at him. That's all. Just looks. And, you want to talk about touched by an angel. If a being appears from 4th, 5th, 6th density, a positive being in your local space-time field, and just looks at you, it's a beautiful, wonderful experience. And Joel says, it leaves an indelible memory. Yes, absolutely. And it's beauteous. It's glorious. I've had these kinds of experiences. You never forget it. And it awakens, as it did in Morris, the desire to seek the truth of this occurrence, meaning, what does this mean? What is this? What happened to me? Who was that being? Why me? Who? What does it mean? And then the truth of the experiences of one's life, one's incarnation in general. Why am I here? Who am I? What's the purpose? All of those answers are available within. So here, this may have some bearing on Karen's question. This guy is not actually necessarily asking all these questions, but they're not telling him. The contact didn't say, I'm going to tell you everything about this experience, and I'm going to tell you all this about the purpose of your life. It doesn't happen like that. The awakening is a triggering, a download of light, a download of potential, actually. A door opening through which we have to walk, or we can walk, and find for ourselves the answers. And so the feeling of being awakened or activated, like a Shaktipat Kundalini touch, being awakened or activated is the goal of this type of contact. So there are other types of Confederation contact also. But in general, they're awakening and activating. The duration, the imagery, varies depending on our expectations. So that's very useful. So you can compare that to negative contact, which we'll talk about in a moment, which doesn't have the same uplifting quality at all, of course. So any final questions about positive contact here? Again, you can bring this to your reading of cases of various types of human ET contact, many of which are not so clearly positive, which would indicate negative contact or government manipulation, mind control, ... It's, there's a timeline to the awakening that occurs during an incarnation. And there's sort of the master timeline set before the incarnation, and then it's modified during the incarnation according to how well we wake up, or we move into greater consciousness sequentially during the phases of a lifetime. So there are many opportunities we miss, and that changes the speed and the nature of the activation, awakening experiences. Not only Confederation contact, but who we meet and what they suggest to us. Like Rod talked about Franklin Roosevelt, right? Remember that? Franklin D. Roosevelt was a very positive fellow, and yet at some point became attached to power distortions, like many in politics. And that was the cause of getting polio, right? Catalyst not accepted by mind and spirit is then offered to body. He didn't realize that addiction to power and control and domination politics, that of his peers wasn't his way and wasn't good for him. And the result was that he was heavily stricken by polio and as a means of bringing him back to his path. So let's talk about Wanderers and Orion contact. This is kind of relevant to the abduction phenomenon and a lot of what's discussed at UFO conferences, which is quite muddled. So, Wanderers and Orion contact. Wanderers become completely the creature of third density in mind-body-spirit complex. It should be mind-body-spirit complex. There's just as much chance of an Orion influence to a Wanderer entity as to a mind-body-spirit complex of this planetary sphere, meaning a 3D native. The only difference occurs in the spirit complex, which, if it wishes, has an armor of light, which enables it, the Wanderer, to recognize more clearly that which is not as it would appropriately be desired. This is not more than a bias and cannot be called an understanding. So the Wanderers become quite ordinary in mind-body complex. Yes, I'm sorry. It is correct in mind-body complex. The point is, Wanderers are subject to physical disease and body ailment, as well as all sorts of psychological and mental problems, dysfunction, neurosis, psychosis. and many wanderers, of course, have emotional mental issues. We all do, somewhat. Many wanderers have severe mind-body issues. And like you said, Joel, knowing you're a wanderer doesn't make everything easy, and it makes some things harder, and can lead to more significant mind troubles after awakening. And in terms of Orion contact or influence, the wanderer is susceptible or vulnerable too, and in fact more of a target to Orion. Orion means fourth and fifth density negative, associated with the Orion constellation, but not only. And they're here too, and wanderers are high priority targets. I just read something from the Law of One. Don was asking when he was about to give a talk at somebody's UFO conference, 70s or 80s or something, 70s I guess, or 80s, and he got very nauseous and sick. And Ross said this was because there were entities who were greatly desirous of him speaking or of hearing the Law of One, meaning he was going to be talking about the Law of One, and there were positive entities in the room who were greatly desirous of hearing the Law of One, and that brought Orion contact to Don to exploit the weakness, in this case, of body complex, third chakra, stomach. And he became nauseous and sick. Whether he could talk or not, I don't know. But he got sick from an Orion 4D negative exploit, or 5D negative, but probably 4D negative, exploit of his own, body complex weakness in the stomach area, associated with third chakra blockage, associated with, butterflies in the stomach, fear, anxiety with public speaking, or, whatever complexes he had in terms of third chakra blockage, creating that basically weakening him and making it less likely that he'll be able to talk about the Law of One. Meanwhile, positive entities were in that area, in higher dimensional association, hoping, greatly desirous of hearing him speaking the Law of One. So, in many Buddhist scriptures, they talk about the Buddha was, in the original stuff, which is not very superstitious or kind of magical. In the original Pali, P-A-L-I, Pali canon from India, 2,500 years ago, they often talk about devas, higher dimensional angelic beings, higher dimensional beings, reverentially surrounding the Buddha and asking for teachings. So higher dimensional beings are very much around those who are speaking the Law of One or speaking genuine enlightenment. So that's what led to Don's Orion contact that time. So the wanderer, however, in the spirit complex has this armor of light which simply allows us to see negativity more readily than a 3D native. And so if the wanderer is very love-oriented and thinks everybody is nice and kind, and I don't want to think bad of anybody, I don't want to judge or criticize anybody, then they can be easily fooled or duped or tricked. Because they're actually disregarding their own armor of light in the spirit complex, which could see clearly negative orientation in the people around. And so discernment is native to the spirit complex. It's a fifth, sixth chakra recognition, which is quite available for the wanderer. So wanderers need not be naive. Only when we don't want to see negativity, then we may actually disregard our greater awareness. So that's very interesting. So furthermore, the wanderer is, in its own mind-body spirit, less distorted towards deviousness of the third density positive-negative confusions. Thus, the wanderer often does not recognize as easily as a more negative individual the negative nature of thoughts or beings, and wanderers are high priority targets of Orion. So the wanderer is by nature less negative, less distorted towards deviousness of the, that is an element of the third density polarity issue, the issue of positive-negative confusion. So yes, the wanderer doesn't recognize as easily negativity as a more negative individual, but the wanderer has this armor of light which is available for protection. So, if the wanderer demonstrates through action a negative orientation towards others, it would be caught into the planetary vibration, and when harvested, possibly repeat the master cycle of 3D as a planetary entity. This is the great fear for wanderers at the end of the contract, or any time during the incarnational series, which is, wow, I have to repeat the cycle in third density. And it happens. And that's if the wanderer, but it's not about getting angry sometimes. It's not about having, fantasy of selfish action or domination or harm. It's demonstration through action, negative orientation towards others in a consistent way. It could be then caught into the 3D vibration, and at harvest time, harvest doesn't necessarily mean ascension. But when the planet harvests and the 3D cycle ends, that wanderer may have to repeat the 75,000-year master cycle. So raw terms, the 75,000-year cycle of 3D as a master cycle, 25,000-year precession of the equinox is a major cycle. And those are just terms they use. So, when now Ra's talking further about Wander-Orion contact. When that contact occurs, it is quite rare. It occurs either due to the Orion entity's lack of perception of the depth of positivity to be encountered, or due to the Orion entity's desire to attempt to remove this positivity from this plane of existence, i.e., kill the wanderer, or severely damage the wanderer. Orion tactics normally are those which choose the simple distortions of mind which indicate less mental and spiritual complex activity. Karen, get some feedback. Can you mute your microphone? Thanks. So, this is when the wanderer is contacted by Orion, it's rare. And the two explanations that Ra gives are quite interesting. One is the Orion entity's mistake, actually, lack of perception of the depth of positivity that be encountered, meaning they won't be able to sway that wanderer, and they don't make direct contact. In general, Orion exaggerates our pre-existing distortions. Any pattern of mind or behavior that is without sufficient love and balance can be energized by Orion, like Dawn's stomach condition probably was based on a pre-existing stomach weakness, like all the cases of Carla having psychic greeting or psychic attack by Orion 5D negative, in fact, which happened throughout the channeling, worked on pre-existing etheric and physical damage that she had. They normally don't make direct contact, but they also could make direct contact to attempt to remove this positivity from this plane of existence, i.e. they want to kill him or her, or derange him or her, the wanderer. Normally, Orion works on two different entities. One, those with simple distortions of mind, meaning people who are not that smart, or people who haven't developed mentally or spiritually greatly, and also those who are forming the elite, meaning somewhat highly developed 3D negative souls. So, Orion abduction contacts. I'm going to keep reading through here. We have only about 35 minutes left, and I want to, at least we'll finish these sections. Orion abduction and contacts. And this is talking about physical examination. Physical examination used as a means of terrifying the individual and causing it to feel the feelings of an advanced 2D being, such as a laboratory animal. Sexual experiences of some are a subtype of this experience. The intent is to demonstrate control of the Orion entities over the Terran, the earthly inhabitant. These are 3D natives generally. Preponderance of human ET contacts is Orion-oriented. These are important points. The most typical approach of Orion is to choose the weaker-minded entity that it might suggest a greater amount of Orion philosophy to be disseminated. You are a slave, like that. Or, you want power. Power is good. Beat your neighbor. This is Orion philosophy. Domination is good, love is weakness. Some few Orion entities are called by more highly polarized negative entities of your space-time nexus. In this case, they share information just as we do. However, there is a risk for the Orion entities due to the frequency with which harvestable negative planetary entities attempt to bid or order the Orion contact, just as these entities bid planetary negative contacts. The resulting struggle for mastery, if lost, is damaging to Orion group polarity. Similarly, a mistaken Orion contact with highly polarized positive entities can wreak havoc with Orion troops, unless the Crusaders are able to depolarize the entity mistakenly contacted. This occurrence is almost unheard of. Therefore, Orion entity or the Orion group prefers to make physical contact only with weaker-minded entities. So, this is pretty hardcore stuff now. So, first of all, this is an explanation about the physical exam type negative contact. Physical exam can be used as a means of terrifying the individual, causing trauma. This is trauma and violation. To feel the feelings of an animal, advanced 2D being like an animal. Some UFO researchers, abduction specialists, have actually said, well, abduction or what appears to be violation, what's experienced as a violation, trauma, contact, is really them trying to help us just like we try to help Arctic seals. And we tag them and we inject them and we take them into zoos and we do this and that to them. We're just trying to help them, but they can't see it. Or we take a big needle in the emergency room to help the child, but he's terrified and traumatized, but we're only trying to help. Interestingly, making the analogy of the contactee or abductee with an animal or a child is is apologetics, or a way of whitewashing negative contact. And Ross says straight up, part of the purpose of a negative contact is to make the person feel like an animal, meaning helpless, to feel violated, fully violated. So, the negatives are tricky, and they weaken people. They like to make people feel that that people have no hope. So Karen says resistance is futile. Actually, that's not true. Resistance is unnecessary, but when the mind is full in power and awareness of unity, negative contact stays away. So such a notion that resistance is futile is actually a negative philosophy. And that's exactly what they would like to suggest to people in the contact of abduction. that resistance is futile. That's bullshit, actually. And it's not even necessary to have a contact with negative force if one is centered in power and oneness. So the preponderance of human ET contacts is Orion-oriented. This is a very interesting point. There are not many wanderers here. Wanderers are the only ones getting Confederation contact. So most contacts are Orion. Now we're talking about physical contact. And in many cases, this is choosing the weaker-minded entity, or the person who isn't centered in their own power, or their own clarity of mind, so that Orion can suggest service to self philosophy. Now, as I said, it's also true. Some Orion entities are called by 3D negatives, meaning those who are using mind and will to polarize service to self without love. And very few of those humans are harvestable, but they're trying. And in this case, they share information, meaning the ways of service to self. Look at the conspiracy material. Look at the protocols of the elders of Zion. Whoever wrote that, forged or not, it's clearly very advanced service to self philosophy. Jewish or not Jewish, I don't know. It's not even important. But that's an example of sharing information from 4D negatives so that 3D negatives can put the world into order with themselves at the top. But then there's a risk for the Orion entities due to the frequency with which harvestable negative planetary entities, meaning really advanced 3D negative humans, are bidding, ordering. Bidding equals ordering. Orion, meaning enslaving their demon spirits, and that's done in black magic. Crowley and other magicians know well about certain spells and magical formulae so as to bind the spirits that are being called. And resulting struggle for mastery. Struggle for mastery, if lost, is damaging to the Orion group polarity. Similarly, mistaken Orion contact with highly polarized positive entities, meaning wanderers, can wreak havoc with the Orion troops unless the Crusaders can depolarize the entity mistakenly contacted. It is almost unheard of, meaning it doesn't happen. So if Orion contacts a wanderer, it's because they're trying to eliminate him or her. Carla, in the channeling, was contacted many times by... They actually had a long-term 5D negative Orion visitor who was with them, and lost polarity. That Orion entity lost polarity regularly. So, yeah, this is the devil's in the details, and it's a really good question. Literally, the devil is in the details. If you see, let's just start from what Ross says. If the contact felt to be violation, terror, and trauma, then it was very likely negative. Now, if the contactor, the contacting extraterrestrial group, is negative, they do not become positive. And even if the person changes their attitude and comes to welcome it, it's still called negative contact. It's still for the purpose of domination and control. It's still not for that person's best interest in terms of love and wholeness. So, it's also possible, as we see here, that a wanderer could be expecting a physical examination or terror or trauma or fear, and the positive Confederation contact would allow them to experience that somewhat, and then when they worked through, it would be seen in a positive light. The thing is, Confederation contacts are generally not ongoing in the same way as Orion contacts are ongoing or appear to be. There are three contactors: Confederation, 4D, 5D, 6D positive. Orion, generally 4D, 5D negative, but almost always 4D negative. Or human covert agencies, military intelligence. Okay, they do abduction or something like that. Was John Mack helping his clients make positive interpretation of Orion contact? Helping his clients make positive spiritual orientation towards military intelligence contact? These are called MILABs, M-I-L-A-B-S. In fact, you can Google that, M-I-L-A-B-S. Means military abductions. Lovely, huh? Or was he helping wanderers realize the truth of a positive activation experience with the Confederation? Those are the only three choices. Okay, two out of three are no good, not very nice. And the question is, are those people wanderers? I don't know. All I would say, I think it would go case by case, but I would surmise that the majority of people that he's helping move into a positive interpretation or positive mode of reception of the contact, most of those people are getting Orion contact or military contact. That's what I would say. And I would frankly say that the same is of Jacobs and Hopkins. And I've met Bud Hopkins and Jacobs also. And they don't seem to be particularly, God-centered. I don't think they're bad people. They also both may be military operatives. I don't know, Believe it or not, there are far more of those than you realize. Many, many. This is just my humble opinion. But I would say most of the people, most of the people doing abduction research are probably working with people who are having Orion contact or 3D negative human contact. Okay? Some of them are agents themselves. Nobody is former military. If you're once in, they're always in. That's how I would assume. That's just how STS works, I think. So, this is voodoo or witchcraft may be related to, so those are early versions of negative magic, mind using energy for service to self. But unfortunately, there are also abduction researchers or therapists, counselors, who are genuinely positive, and they are wanderers, and they're trying to help people. It's just, in general, if the contact evoked fear and terror, then that evocation of fear and terror was part of the purpose. Not that being the human failing, or the failing of the human contactee, but that the trauma, the violation that was sensed and experienced was part of the purpose of the contact. So, yeah. Orion contact is ongoing. So Ross says, the preponderance of human ET contacts is Orion-oriented. So anyway, just, consider all that when you evaluate other UFO contact researchers. It's a very ugly scene. But in general, what you've got is Orion working with 3D human negatives, working upon 3D human non-polarized souls, meaning people who are not clearly positive also. And, physical examination and implantation and all of that is a portion of that. Some of it's really happening, some of it's not really happening. But some of it is genuine. Ra talks about implants also, so you can look that up. So negative 60 wanderers, Ra says, similarly to the positive wanderer, negatively oriented wanderer, of which there are few, that dares to hazard the forgetting in order that it might accelerate progress in evolution in its own density by serving itself in third density, by offering other selves the opportunity to hear the information having to do with negative polarization. So the negative wanderer, of which there are not many, also dares the danger of forgetting, which is coming under the 3D veil, so that it can accelerate its progress in evolution in home density, of course, by service to self here in 3D. And that service to self in 3D offers other selves, the opportunity to hear the way of separation, the way of service to self. Once the negatively polarized entity has reached a certain point in the wisdom density, 5, fifth density negative, it becomes extremely unlikely that it will choose to risk the forgetting. For this polarization is not selfless, but selfish. And with wisdom, right, it really has wisdom, in 5D negative, it realizes the jeopardy of such wandering. Occasionally, a 60 negative becomes a wanderer in an effort to continue to polarize towards the negative. This is extremely unusual. And I think Don asked, are there any 60 negative wanderers? And Ra seemed to imply yes and was evasive, in that there may be some around, which is interesting. Orion would use children because they're innocent, because for Orion, or for 3D negative, or for any entity on the negative path, the power differential, the use of power over other, is most intensified when there's a great power differential. So Ra talks about Orion 4D negative preying upon the weaker 3D soul, right, with less mental, spiritual, complex activity. So, meaning naive or less developed mentally, spiritually. So there you've got 4D negative, which is quite advanced compared to 3D, preying upon the least evolved of 3D, meaning less mental, spiritual development. So you've got 4D negative preying on low 3D, 3.1, 3.2 level souls. So preying upon children would be an example of a great power differential that allows them to get high. Like Kissinger said. Kissinger said, power is the greatest aphrodisiac, right? Kissinger is an example of 3D negative who might be harvestable, or he's certainly approaching harvestability to Orion. Hidden Hand, I don't think is 60 negative. Hidden Hand is 3D negative. Using the raw material, abusing or reversing and contorting the raw material in its presentation. Hidden Hand is something available on the name of a person and the name of an organization that provided some pretty direct information on high-level 3D negative from their own perspective as a member to some posters on forum, I think above Top Secret or the David Icke forum. So anyway, that is a genuine source and appears to be 3D negative. So what's the wanderer of any orientation, either positive or negative, must forget or dares the hazard, of forgetting, and risks the consequences of forgetting. For a negative wanderer, of which again there are very few, they might forget that they're negative and become positive. which is a real danger for them. They might not become evil enough. They might get caught up in a positive, loving feeling and not continue polarizing. So, the other thing about Orion or negative or 3D negative using children, some of these children, you see, think about the karma, right? It's pretty horrible karma to be mixed up with 3D negatives as a child. It's quite awful, right? Mind control and so many other things happening. Some of these children, I imagine, are what I would call 4D negative drop-down turnarounds. Meaning, Ra talks about this, that some souls who graduate to 4D negative, in 4D negative, realize that they don't want to be on the negative path. And they have to reverse polarity. They have to release the potential of their achieved development, use of light, use of intelligent energy, and move onto the positive path. And I would imagine one way they might do that is to come down to third density and suffer trauma. And I don't know. But for a 4D negative who wants to change path, I think it might be a very unpleasant process in the beginning. So, there's a great deal of negativity involved in human society, if you haven't noticed. And it's all coming from 4D negative, and it's all coming through advanced 3D negatives. Those who love darkness, those who fear love, those who fear gentleness, those who avoid themselves and avoid their true nature, those who run from surrender, those who are afraid of weakness, those who cannot be quiet, those who cannot be still, those who are afraid of stillness. So, that's one of the reasons that positive wanderers come here, is to counteract the negativity of society, simply by being points of love light. And the final passage here, assessing ET contacts, as I said before, Ross says, if there is fear and doom, contact was quite likely negative. If the result is hope, friendly feelings, and the awakening of positive feeling of purposeful service to others, the marks of Confederation contact are evident. So this, I think, is quite useful in measuring UFO research of ET contact, of which there's a lot. Generally put forward by researchers who are not coming from love. They're coming from mind. Now, mind may be based in love, but there's also use of mind without love, and that's called service to self. The use of wisdom without love. So mind is neutral, will is neutral, love is the only quality that brings us or keeps us on the positive path. So, if you want to know the truth, first you have to really assess the degree of positivity of the source. If they're positive, that's a good start. Then the question is, are they wise or naive? Lots of positive sources are used by negatives because they're not wise and they are naive. But they're positive. But they're still duped or fooled or tricked and become the mouthpiece of negativity or deception. So positivity is not enough. Love is not enough, but it's the starting point. And if there isn't a significant heart awareness or appreciation of unity, then there won't be much truth. But even then, after there is recognition of love-based being and desire for benefit of all in some recognition of oneness. Even then, you have to assess the degree of spiritual maturity and mental sophistication of the source. Otherwise, they're going to be repeating mistakes. Kindly, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions, this kind of thing. Good intentions are not enough. Wisdom is necessary. So, a good friend of mine used to say, love without wisdom is evil. This is not true, but love without wisdom is easily used by negative sources, and it's very common. So not only, is love essential, meaning true desire for the benefit of all, and a quiet heart appreciating tenderness and kindness, and a recognition, somewhat of oneness. But after that, still then also is necessary development of discernment, wisdom, clarity. So, thank you everybody for being here. We'll be together again next Monday, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. If you have questions from today's discussion and the reading, and you want to bring them up next week, please do so. In the original, in the first portion next week, bring any questions you might have from this week, because there's a lot to digest here. Actually, it was my birthday last week, April 22nd. So, thank you again, everybody. I'm going to sign off and hope to see you all next week. Okay?